it possible that I have just found my favorite contemporary romance of all time in this series? And not just one, but two 5-star reads. Let's see. In this video, I'm gonna be giving my spoiler-free review of the Twisted series by Ana Huang. First, I'm gonna talk about the series as a whole, and then I will dive into each book individually. I will give you a brief summary of what each story is about, what's the main plot and what are the different subplots, and I'll also share my impressions for each book. Is this series for you? Is there anything that you should be aware of before you start to read this series? What are the main topics of each book? And which order should you read these books in? Can you read them separately? Let's dive into it, shall we? And as a disclaimer, I read this whole series on my Kindle, so I do not own physical copies of these books. The Twisted series is a contemporary romance, and it consists of 4 interconnected standalones: Twisted Love, Twisted Games, Twisted Hate, and Twisted Lies. It follows a set of 4 friends, Ava, Bridget, Jules, and Stella. They all study at Thayer University in Washington, D.C., but each of them is following a different career path. They have different backgrounds and different stories. The series as a whole spans over 3 to 4 years. And as I mentioned, this is a series of interconnected standalones. So each book tells the story of each of these women. And you can read each of these books as standalones because you will get a full and conclusive story if you read each of these books separately. But it is recommended that you read the whole series in order because although each book completes and closes the story of each set of main characters, all the characters appear throughout the series, and the stories of those characters in the earlier books keep developing throughout the series. You keep hearing of them and keep hearing of how they are doing. And it all wraps up nicely by the end of the 4th book when you get the absolute conclusion of the whole series. Also, each of these books doesn't necessarily start right after the previous. Some of the stories begin somewhere in the middle of the previous book, and you get the narration of that new story from that point. So you already see things happening in the previous book that will be later explained when it's the turn of that story. Also, something that I love about this series is that it has a dual first-person point of view narration, which means that some chapters are narrated by the female main character and some other chapters are narrated by the male main character. So you get both perspectives on the story. Now, if you're looking for a cozy, fun, easygoing rom-com, perhaps this series is not for you. Not to say that this series isn't fun or feel good, but it also contains some heavier, darker topics. Some of the characters experience trauma. They are dealing with complicated pasts. There are somewhat toxic behaviors, and I have even seen this series categorized as a dark romance. It is a bit more on the darker side compared to a happy rom-com, but this is not a dark romance. I am not a dark romance reader, so when comparing this series to those, I think that this has nothing to do with dark romance, so don't be afraid of starting this series because of that categorization, because I do not think it's correct, to be honest. There are some darker elements in this series, but I will discuss what those are for each of the books, and then you can decide whether they are for you or not. But overall, even if this series contains some darker, heavier elements, you will leave uplifted and you will feel good by the end. So don't let that previous information deter you. Let's start with book number 1. That is Twisted Love. Twisted Love follows the story of Ava Chen and Alex Volkov. At the time the first book starts, the 4 friends are around the age of 22, and they are all still studying in university. Ava lives on campus and she has a brother, Josh Chen. The story begins when Josh Chen, Ava's older brother, who also lives on campus, is moving abroad for a while, and he asks his best friend, Alex Volkov, if he can keep an eye on her. Alex Volkov is a friend of the family. He met Josh many years ago when they were still in their teens. So Ava has always seen Alex Volkov around their house, but they've always kept their distance. Alex has this very cold, calculating personality, so they've never had really any sort of relationship. Alex is somewhat of a prodigy. He's a very smart individual, and he has built an empire. He's the CEO and mind behind a big corporation related to technology or something like that. And of course, he is a billionaire at the young age of, I think, 26, 27. So he's a bit older than Ava, but just maybe 4 or 5 years older. Nothing more than that. Alex is very calculating, but he is also very loyal to his friend. And he decides to move close to Ava, to the same building, to follow up on her. And from there, the story starts developing. So you can guess what happens. He becomes a bit protective of her. They start meeting in many occasions. They start getting to know each other. And feelings might start blossoming between the two of them. So this is a story about a forbidden romance between the brother's best friend and the best friend's younger sister. He's a rather grumpy, cold, calculating character, and she's this sunshine, positive attitude type of girl. But this is not everything. There are different subplots aside from the main romantic plot. They are both dealing with traumas from their pasts related to their respective families. And there are some dark secrets. There are also some questionable things that happen related to these subplots. But again, I do not think that this is a dark romance. If anything, some of the darker things that happen have to do with this past from each of these characters. The events of this book happen within a period of a couple of years. The 4 friends appear in this book, and we get to know who they are and a bit of their personalities. We start to see the dynamics of some of these friends with the person that will be the male main character in their story. So already in the middle of Twisted Love, we find out about Bridget and her newly assigned and grumpy bodyguard, which takes me to book number 2, Twisted Games. In Twisted Games, we follow the story of Bridget von Ascheberg, the crown princess of a fictional European country called Eldora, and her bodyguard, Rhys Larsen. As I said before, each book doesn't necessarily begin at the same time where the previous book finishes. Their story starts brewing already from the middle of book 1. And as I said, you can hint things already through book 1 of these 2 characters, but it doesn't go deep into it. However, book 2 starts in one of those scenes that happens in the middle of book 1. So we get Bridget and Rhys's story from the beginning. So as I said, Bridget is this princess that studies in America, away from all the pressure and the media that she feels back in her home country. She feels like she can somewhat live a normal life at Thayer University with this group of friends, and she wants to enjoy feeling like a normal person before taking on her royal duties once she graduates. She's always accompanied by a bodyguard, but her trusted bodyguard has to leave, and he is replaced by a new bodyguard, which is Rhys Larsen. And Rhys Larsen is a bit different from her previous bodyguards. For starters, he is not part of the royal security team. He is a contractor from a very important security firm owned by Christian Harper. And remember that name also, because we will talk about him later. Rhys Larsen is this ex-military, ex-Navy SEAL personal bodyguard, and he's rather serious, gruff, and grumpy, and quite different to Bridget's previous bodyguard. He is rather strict when it comes to Bridget's security, and this causes their relationship to strain. They are always butting heads with each other. The story begins in Washington, D.C., when Bridget is still studying with her friends at Thayer University. But once she graduates, she has to move to New York and Eldora to fulfill her royal duties. And this book is divided in 2 parts. I'm not gonna say much more because I don't want to spoil it. But this is also a tale of forbidden love, even more so than the previous one, because the previous one was a forbidden love because of the relationship that each of those main characters had with Josh, the best friend and the sister. So there was this dynamic of having a romance in the background behind Josh's back. and both of them feeling guilty. But in this case, the forbidden element of this romance goes a step farther because there are a lot of things at stake in this story, and there are a lot of things that make this love impossible. They have to keep everything hidden. It is not okay for them to be together. At many points in this story, I just didn't know how could they possibly move forward. And this story is a rather slow burn. It happens over the span of 3 years or so. So if you love a slow burn, you're gonna like this. Now, here we are also dealing with some traumas from the past of each of these characters. But this has to do more with things that they each experience. I don't think there's any dark romance element in this book at all. There's a bit of an age gap between Bridget and Reese. I believe it's about 10 years difference. So Bridget is 22, 23 by the time they meet, and Reese is 30, 32, somewhere around that. But honestly, this age gap is not key at all in this story. So if we would remove the element of age, it wouldn't change or affect the plot in any way. If they would have the same age, the story would continue being exactly the same throughout. But anyway, this was excellent. And for me, this story was just perfect in every regard. This was a 5-star read for me. I love this story. I read it twice. And I'm not one to give 5 stars lightly when it comes to romances, but this one was just that good. If growing up you loved Princess Diaries 2, the movie with Anne Hathaway and Chris Pine, and First Daughter with Katie Holmes, you might like Twisted Games, because to me it feels like a more adult take with a lot more angst and tension and passion on these two movies. Although the plot is different to these movies, it has elements of both. It has this Eldoran princess similar to the Genovian princess that finds herself somehow challenging old rules from her country, and also with First Daughter that has a romance between the prime minister's daughter and a bodyguard. So although they are not the same plots, it really reminded me of them. And a fact about this book is that Ana Huang was listening to the song Arcade by Duncan Lawrence when she was writing this book. And when you listen to it now, I got addicted to a losing game. It's perfect for this story. Now we move to book number 3, Twisted Hate. And this book covers the story of Josh Chen. If you remember, he was Ava's older brother from Twisted Love and Alex Volkov's best friend, and Jules, who is Ava's best friend. So now we have a reverse sort of situation. Now Josh will live a romantic story with Ava's best friend. And this book is called Twisted Hate because, yes, you guessed it, this is an enemies to lovers, hate to love romance. You already notice Josh's and Jules' dynamic in the first and second book on the brief appearances they have, and you know that they do not get along with each other. Since this was the third book, I had already sensed this vibe, and I already knew that they were the main set of characters for the third book, so I was super excited to read this book because enemies to lovers is one of my favorite tropes. And this story has the best banter and bickering that I've seen in any romance that I have read. The amount of times that I laughed at their banter throughout this book, I cannot even count them. It was like watching a tennis match. They kept giving each other funny remarks and the other one could always throw something better. Every interaction they had, I thoroughly enjoyed. They had such great humor between them. The tension between them was very well built, and the remarks and comments that they kept throwing at each other were just spot on. They just kept going and going and going and going with the banter. And I loved this book. I actually created a bookshelf on my Goodreads called Best Banter, and now this book sits alone there waiting for other books to be added to that bookshelf. This book also begins to happen somewhere at the middle of book 2 of Twisted Games, and you see glimpses of the build-up to this story already on the first book, but you see things that start looking suspicious and that start happening already on the second book. So while the second book is happening and Bridget is dealing with her Eldorian duties, this book is happening in the background in DC. So apart from Ava's friend, Jules is this very fiery, fun, extroverted, kind of gets into trouble every now and then type of friend. And Josh is this charming, good-looking doctor who graduated a few years ago and is doing his residence in the hospital. As I said, Jules and Josh don't really get along well, and it all started because Ava is Jules' best friend, and Jules has this crazy outgoing personality that sometimes causes some sort of troubles for her and her friends. And Josh is very protective of his sister Ava and considers Jules to be somewhat of a bad influence for Ava. So that is where the animosity between Jules and Josh begins. However, due to the nature of their relationships with their beloved ones, between Alex, who's Josh's best friend, and Ava being Jules' best friend and Josh's sister, they find themselves in many situations where they have to be together in the same room, in the same vicinity, in order to spend time with Alex and Ava. But also, apart from these situations in their personal lives where they find themselves in the same room, in close proximity, there's the added factor that Jules begins some sort of traineeship as a lawyer in Josh's workplace. So they start seeing each other also there. And from there, the story starts to develop. And well, you can imagine how the story and the romance progresses. This was such a great read. Again, this story incorporates elements of emotional baggage and family trauma. And the name of this book, Twisted Hate, fits the story pretty well. And if you like the category of enemies to lovers, this book is a great representation of it. Now we move to book number 4, which is Twisted Lies. And this book follows the story between Stella Alonso and Christian Harper. And now you might say, Christian Harper, that sounds familiar. That's because I mentioned his name during book 2 in Twisted Games. He is Reese Larsen's boss. He owns the security company that Reese works for. And we hear about him for the first time during book 2. He even makes a couple of appearances there, but he also appears in book 3, in Twisted Hate. Book 4, Twisted Lies, is a book that starts pretty much at the end of book 3. I can't recall at the moment if there was any overlap, but I believe that it pretty much starts at the end of book 3. By that time, all the friends are out of university, and Stella is this fashion and social media influencer who works at a magazine in Washington, D.C., but has other aspirations in terms of her career related to fashion. And Christian Harper is this ruthless CEO with a bit of a reputation for being rather dangerous and not someone that you would want to mess up with. The setting of the story is also Washington, D.C., and the story begins when Stella and Christian find themselves in a situation where they are living under the same roof. Christian starts developing somewhat of an obsession for Stella. Apart from being this CEO, he's also very smart and somewhat of a developer, in this way quite similar to Alex Volkov. And Stella finds herself in a situation in which she requires some help for a situation that she's facing in her career, and Christian Harper conveniently offers to help her. And they strike a deal, which results in both of them kind of fake dating. At the same time, Stella also faces a rather dangerous situation of her own. She attracts the attention of a stalker, and Christian, being his fake boyfriend and also having this real obsession with her and having this security company and these developer skills himself, he also offers her protection from this stalker, and he dedicates a lot of resources towards finding him and protecting her. And this is kind of where the plot of this story is at. So this story is not exactly the same, but closer to Twisted Love. This is also somewhat of a billionaire romance with the element of fake dating. There's a bit of possessive love in here. Out of the 4 stories, I believe if there would be any that resembles dark romance, it would be this one, because he's a bit of a possessive character with quite many hidden secrets He does very questionable things in the background on the side of his business that have to do with more criminal activities. There is a little bit of that in Twisted Love as well, but this one is slightly darker. Also, with this element of overprotectiveness and obsession from the male main character, this could also shift the story into more of a dark romance compared to the previous three. But again, I still don't think this one is a dark romance. It just goes a little bit more into that direction. And also there is a bit of an age gap between Christian and Stella in a similar way as with Reese and Bridget. I think they are about 10 years apart. So this is the summary of each of the 4 books. So now when it comes to ranking the books in this series, from least to most favorite. And this is just a ranking based on my own personal preferences. I would place Twisted Lies in number 4 because of this darker element that it contained. I did like the character of Christian Harper, and I was already quite intrigued about him after his appearance for the first time in the second book. So there was a bit of build-up for this character, and I was very interested in knowing what his story was about. But to me, some of the darker elements that happened towards the end of the book took me away from the whole romantic story between him and Stella, and they were rather questionable and shady and criminal related. So not my favorite topic. So that's why I would place this book number 4. I still enjoy this read. Also, Stella was the female main character that I connected the least with. Then I would place Twisted Love as the 3rd. For similar reasons as Twisted Lies. To be honest, they could be either way. They could be 3rd and 4th or vice versa. They were pretty similar to me in the sense that they both were billionaire romances. I don't have anything against billionaire romances. It's not a category I'm drawn to, but I've read many of those and will keep reading many of those. But they were not as appealing to me as the other 2 that are on my top 2. But I will say that although perhaps I've placed Twisted Love slightly above Twisted Lies, I like Christian Harper's character more than Alex Volkov's. In number 2, I will place Twisted Hate. I love the banter. It was a great fun story. It was a great enemies to lover, hate to love story. And there are so many books in that category that, in my opinion, do not fulfill the expectations of an enemies to lovers. And this book does. It was fun to read. I like the story. I like that they both were normal people. It was the only of the 4 stories where both of them were just ordinary people. Because in the other stories, we either had billionaires, or then in Bridget's and Reese's story, she is a princess. So this was the more realistic in a way. But I did enjoy this story a lot. And even though it's my number 2, I gave this story a 5 stars because I just had so much fun reading it, and I will probably read it again. And I also enjoyed Jules's and Josh's personality. They were fun between each other with their banter and bickering, but they were also fun individually. And they were both rather charming, and they have interesting personalities and their jobs and their lives. Everything was nicely put together. And my number 1 can be no other than Twisted Games. This story was perfection to me. It was a story that had the best plot, in my opinion. Also interesting subplots. The romance had a lot of high stakes, longing, angst, forbidden love. It was the healthiest relationship out of the 4 of them. The male main character, Reese, had such a great personality, in my opinion. I liked his character development throughout the book and how his relationship with Bridget evolved. And it's just overall a very well-packed romance in every way. It had everything that I was looking for and more. And I also rated it a 5 stars. And again, I'm not someone who gives 5 stars lightly when it comes to contemporary romances. But to me, this one felt very complete. It just had everything that I was looking for. So I would definitely recommend you this series. If you have all the books in this series, or you have time to read all the books in this series, I would recommend you to read it in order. But as I said, you can also read them as standalones. So if you find yourself with time constraint, or you only feel drawn towards one and just want to buy and read one, you can definitely do that. Choose the one that calls the most to you based on the description of the book, the characters, and the different subgenres. So if you like billionaire romances with morally questionable characters, then perhaps Twisted Love and Twisted Lives are more for you. If you love a good enemies to lovers, then perhaps go for Twisted Hate. But if you ask me, if there's just one book out of this series that you have to read, if you only have time for one book in this series, then I would tell you to go for Twisted Games because it's fantastic. But again, if you can read the entire series, perfect. Also, if you decide to read the entire series and perhaps billionaire romances are not your thing, or perhaps the darker elements of the first book are not your cup of tea, I would tell you don't let the first book deter you if it's not your thing, because the following books are different and they are so much worth it. So if you enjoy the first one, great, continue. If you don't, still continue, because Twisted Game and Twisted Hate for me, as I said, amazing. This is the first time that I've read anything by Ana Huang, so I had no idea what to expect. She has many different series of books, and now that I've read Twisted, I'm definitely gonna continue reading more of her books. Something that I also liked about the Twisted series is that she introduced characters that appear in her other series. Dante Russo, he appears in the third and fourth book of the Twisted series. He is one of Christian Harper's billionaire clients, and he is the male main character in King of Wrath, which is the first book of the Kings of Sin series. And this is a series of 7 books that are themed around the 7 deadly sins. So there is King of Wrath, King of Pride, King of Greed, King of Sloth, King of Envy, and those are the 5 that are currently published. But we will also get King of Gluttony and King of Lust, I believe, pretty soon. This is a series of billionaire romances. So as I said, billionaire romances are not my favorite category, but I will read them. I'm curious about Dante and about his story because he's presented with his fiancée in the Twisted series, and they find themselves in a situation of an arranged marriage, and I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. So I will for sure read the first book on that series, and then from there let's see how I feel about those billionaire romances. There is also another character called Asher Donovan that appears in the Twisted series. If I recall correctly, he appears on Twisted Hate in Jules's and Josh's book. And that character is the male main character of a different series that Anna has, that is the Gods of Games series. And it follows this Asher Donovan, who is a professional soccer player. And the book is called The Striker. And I believe this will also be a longer series, but at the moment this is the only book published in that series. And the topic of that series is sports romance. So I will also give it a try. There is a second book announced called The Defender. So I'm also curious about that series. I will definitely keep reading more books from Ana Huang. I hope that this video was useful and that it has helped you make up your mind on whether this is a series for you or not. If you pick this series, I hope that you will enjoy it the same way I did, especially Twisted Games. Let me know in the comments whether you've read any of these books or are planning to. And if you have, which one is your favorite and why? And if you have recommendations on similar books, I would love to hear them out as well. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video.